Welcome back, my friends, my colleagues, my friends, all the above. Hold on a second here. There we go. So I have an interesting topic that I've been mulling over that I want to discuss today a little bit. And it actually has to do with, let's get a little sage going. Actually has a lot to do with the Bible. I've been reading the Bible for about a year and a half now. And what should I do? Is there an issue? Hope you guys are not having an issue. I've been reading the Bible for about a year and a half. I started reading the Bible when in 2023 is when I dove into it. Yeah, it's been a year and a half. It's been a battle. I mean, I started in the Torah. I read the entire Torah, and it was cool. I really enjoyed Genesis, the Exodus. And then as it got a little bit later in the Torah, it started to become a battle, which a lot of people had told me it was going to be that. Hold on one second. Picture is in. Okay. We should be all right. I keep getting some pop-up stuff. All right, here we go. Let's get back into the zone. So I finished the Torah, and I really enjoy it. It was hard for sure, and there was a lot of repetitive, mundane things. And then I was motivated, so I kept reading after that. And, books like Judges and Samuel, I think Joshua was in there. And I got up towards Ruth and Kings and then Chronicles. And when I got to there, I had to pause, and I went full tilt. My goal originally was to go from page 1 all the way to the end. I wanted to, since that's why we're not hearing it. My microphone's not plugged in. Hello. Now I hear me. Okay. I was wondering what was going on there. But so I'm going through Chronicles, and I wanted to read it from start to finish. That was my plan. And my goal is, could I read it from like a normal book, right? And go from page 1 all the way to the end. I think there's close to 1,900 pages in it, in the version that I'm reading. And I just got burnt out. I got fatigued like 600 pages in. And it was tough. I'm not somebody who reads. I mean, if you follow the last book that I wrote without words, that's 150 some pages. The book I'm writing right now, I'm about halfway done with 20,000 words into it. I don't foresee it going over 40,000 words. I was at a book event recently called at the Poisoned Pen, the bookstore. So shout out Poisoned Pen in Old Town Scottsdale. It's a really cool bookstore. I was there, and the lady I was sitting next to, for her books, we had all these booths. Her book was 150,000 words. I think both of them were in that range, 150,000. And she was writing one right now that was over 150,000, I think. And I just was mind blown when she told me that. I obviously know people do that. I just have never been somebody who's had the attention span to read that long of a book or want to. And I get so curious about the next thing. I'm like a flash in the pan type thinker, reader. It's like the shiny new toy grabs my attention, and I go to the next thing. So even as a writer, I don't like writing that long, because I feel like once I get to around 40,000, 50,000 words, I'm like done studying the subject. I want to read something else. And the Bible was so intimidating my entire life because of how big it is. I actually have it right here next to me. So, I mean, take a look at this thing. Here's all my notes on it. And, you can see the copy that's in there. I mean, look at the copy that's in that book. It's a big book, obviously. And there's just so much content to it. I mean, take a look at this page. I know if you can't see that, but whoever's, watching this on the film, you can see the copy. The copy is just, it's a lot. And so holding on to it is just intimidating for me. But I had this drive to be able to read it from start to finish. And like I said, I kind of barreled through it, and then I took some time off. And a lot of people had told me that was going to happen to me. And a lot of people told me in the beginning I wouldn't be able to read it straight through or even read it, which I think is normal, communicating with anybody around that. And I'd heard that my whole life, right? So then anyways, I took a lot of time off. I'd go back to it here and there. and I would struggle. It's just like anything. I wouldn't be in a routine. I wouldn't be in a system where I was reading it regularly. So I would lose sort of my motivation or drive to continue on. But then I got in the New Testament and I just ripped through the New Testament. I mean, the New Testament, I probably finished that in about a month. I was reading it every day. I fell in love with the New Testament, and I read that start to finish, the four Gospels. What is it? Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. And I loved that. I loved those four Gospels. They're somewhat repetitive. I had a couple of friends close to me who kept me motivated through it. I actually paused. Actually, I take that back. That's a lie. That's a fabricated lie. I didn't read the whole Gospels straight through. I went halfway through Luke, and then I skipped over Luke. I came back to Luke and finished it. But then afterwards, you get into Acts and Romans and move even further down to Timothy and the books of John. Obviously, at the end, you get to Revelation, and it just becomes a really cool book. The New Testament was really powerful, which everyone had told me that. I originally wanted to earn the New Testament. So I wanted to read the entire Old Testament to get to the New Testament and earn that. And I failed in that endeavor. But once I read the New Testament, I was so excited. And I think that newfound excitement gave me the momentum that it was needed to go back to the Old Testament and start working through that. And oddly enough, I would be curious to see if you guys have read it, or people who have read it, how you've worked through it. Oddly enough, I started at the end of the Old Testament and I worked my way back. And I have a few pages left of Jeremiah that I'll probably finish later today. And then I'm going to finish Isaiah, and I'll have finished the book. So I'll have 72 of the 73 books completed probably by the end of the night tonight. And then I'll finish the 73rd book. And I chose Isaiah because I've heard nothing but great things. I read a couple verses of it, and I really I've enjoyed it. There's the quote or the verse that's in the movie Fury, which is one of my favorite, if not my favorite war movie, where they're in the tank. Shia LaBeouf is talking to Brad Pitt. Well, he's talking to the tank, and they're getting ready to die. Essentially, they're at this crossroads, and they're going to hold this road against a massive German army. There's like 300 soldiers in this Nazi army, and they're going to hold it down. There was 1, 2, 3, 4. There were 5 people in the tank. If you haven't seen the movie, and Brad Pitt's the leader, and he. Chapter 6, Isaiah. I haven't read the book yet, so I can't remember exactly how this whole thing was going towards it. But basically, Shia LaBeouf has been preaching parts of the Bible the entire movie, and Brad Pitt was always poking at him. And the cool part about this book at the end was that he shares this verse, and Brad Pitt actually quotes it and says what chapter 6, Isaiah. And it was like a really cool moment where Brad Pitt shows his range even further. And they had honored him the whole movie, but he shows his range and his depth of thinking. It's a lot further than what I'm sharing, but it's the part where he's saying there's a line in the Bible with Isaiah where he goes, "Who shall I send?" And the response is, "Send me." And that was their sort of battle cry as a unit before they held ground on this road. And shortly after that, they were in the fight. And so that was cool to me. And so that's why I've saved the book of Isaiah for the final book of my experience with the Christian Bible. And I will, after Isaiah, I'll have completed it. And so I'm coming to the end of this journey, and I've been really focused on it for the last 4 months, probably reading every day for the last 4 months, close to every day. Not every day, but pretty close. And I will have gotten it pretty done. I took a period, like I said, I took probably 6 to 8 months off where I'd open it here and there, but not reading intently like I have. And as I have read intently and I've gotten so much more depth into it, I've started to understand some of the verbiage that's in the Bible and some of the stuff that they're using in the stories. And as I've understood the verbiage, the fear of what it used to be to read such a large book or such depth in a book has gone away. And I've noticed that even parts of what I've noticed earlier in my pursuits when I was reading the Old Testament and at the end of 2023 is there were really hard stories in there of the wrath of God and things that God mentions to the people. And a lot of the times when people committed certain faults and sins and, the famines they had to go through, the pestilence that they were going through, just the wrath essentially that God was promoting on them and doing, that was hard for me to read in the beginning. There was a lot of things that were pretty intense for me and heavy and dark. But I think as I've gotten more into it and I've read, almost completed it, it's not that things aren't dark still, but it's not as intimidating to me because I feel like I can understand the messages rather than the surface level thought of where I'm at, where I read something heavy or dark or intimidating or scary. And at the surface in the beginning, that would really stunt me and make it hard to read certain things. And I would question things really heavily. And now, not that I don't question things still heavily, but now I'm not as insecure, I would say, as reading certain passages because I guess probably that's towards anything in life, right? As you gain an experience in this scenario, an experience of reading throughout the book. I don't know if wisdom is the right way. I don't know how wise you become in a religious endeavor or spiritual endeavor. Maybe not religious, more spiritual endeavor. But the understanding of the information has made it less daunting to me. And I think that might be the point of why you would want to read such an in-depth book. And the Bible is so powerful because the Bible is been around for thousands of years, and it's got to be arguably one of the most famous books, if not the most famous book in the history of humankind. Something that's interesting to me about the Bible that I've thought about a lot over the last couple months is the printing press. I went to the Bible Museum in Washington a couple years ago, and I didn't understand. Obviously, I would love to go back there now after reading the Bible. But at the time, I hadn't read any of the Bible. I mean, it was just verses or Bible studies and things that I'd attended in my whole life, but nothing where I've like sat down and read it like I'm explaining to you right now. And so that'd be cool to go back there. But I was at the Museum of the Bible, and the only thing that really stood out to me then, when I was there, was the printing press, and they had a replica of the printing press that was designed, and it talked a lot about the importance of scaling the Bible. And so we were able to scale the Bible. Now, in my uneducated opinion, in my self-exploration experience, what's interesting about the printing press is that it was developed at the end of the 15th century. And in the middle, in the European, the middle part of the earth, essentially. And I think it was 60 years later, Christianity had its first Reformation with Martin Luther. He wrote up the 95 Thesis on the church, nailed that to the church door, and you had the first Reformation. And then now, so that's the 16th century. So that's thousands of years after Jesus. You have a Reformation, you have a Reform. And then 500 years later, where we are now, we have thousands of forms of Christianity. I mean, you can just drive through any town in America and see numerous different styles of churches of the Catholic religion, the Catholic system. So that's fascinating to me. What's fascinating to me to think about it from a philosophical aspect is from the printing press, because all of a sudden the printing press was able to scale information. So we were able to access deeper, more people had access to the Bible. And within 60 years, so we're going 6 decades later, you get a Reform. And it was big enough, obviously, to get enough people to join. And now you have a divide. You have 2 churches, 2 religions, and somewhat of the same religion using the same book, the Bible. And then obviously you have 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way into the hundreds, into the thousands. And we're still using the word of the Lord being the Bible. But there's so many reforms that have taken place. So if I step outside of the religious aspect and I think about that in terms of life, I think about the access to information and what information does to us and how do we get information? Because if the printing press was able to, within under 100 years, take a religion so massive as Christianity, which now there's 2.4, somewhere around there, definitely over 2 billion people practice Christianity. It's the largest religion in the world. And so with something so massive and so big, what was that changed when all of a sudden more people had access to reading this information or getting it? And so then it makes you question, what was the gatekeeping that was taking place? Obviously, there's a hierarchy in churches and in religion in general, just like a government. There's a hierarchy, just like an educational system or a sports team. There's always a hierarchy. And so there was a hierarchy taking place, no doubt, but it makes me ponder what information does to us. So if you fast forward to the 21st century, you zoom out of the religious aspect, and you think of how crazy the printing press was on the development of humanity and what it did to humankind and how we started to change. What are we doing now with systems? I talk about this so often with AI. And we have access to all sorts of religions. You can read any religious book. You can go on the internet and ask any question. And so you have all sorts of religions. And I think so much so, I think that has so much to do with the breaking of the current model and the moral code of humanity, is that I think we're just in a state of confusion with what the moral code is. We're not necessarily sure what the compass is for human morality. What is the value system? Something I've thought about as an American is America is only a few hundred years old. And if I go over to Europe and I look at some of the traditional practices in Europe, or I look at some of the traditional practices of Christianity, they're so deeply rooted and so historically sustained. What's the tradition of being an American? I mean, what are our traditions? If you exclude things like Christmas and those sort of things, so much of tradition in America could be emphasized as football. Football comes to mind as a tradition. I mean, the country celebrates the Super Bowl. We materialize the Super Bowl halftime show. We materialize the commercials. We have Super Bowl parties. It's definitely a tradition. We have college football on Saturdays. We have sporting events. And so much of our traditions, if I think about it, and tell me your guys' thoughts as well, but so much of our traditions are based off of sport in America, from what I can tell. And so you still have to ask yourself the question, what's the moral code? What are the commandments of an interconnected globe? If we're interconnected now, not only in America, we're interconnected globally because of the digital dimension that we now have. What is the moral code of all of us? If we're all now connected and able to communicate, how are we morally aligned would be my question. Peace is a different topic. A utopia, I don't think, is accessible. I think that we can't outdo duality. That's a lot of the contracting and understanding that I've gathered from so much of the religions. I mean, that's one of the first lessons in Genesis, is that when Adam and Eve, they took the advice of the serpent, ate from the tree of knowledge and ate the apple, they left spiritual, energetic form and became physical form in their nakedness. And the thing that really stood out to me about that was when they were in nakedness in the moment, they were insecure, which is why they covered themselves with plants, and vines. But in their moment of insecurity, they were simultaneously judging the other person's nakedness. And that, to me, is one of the first initial, if not the first initial lesson of paradox. And where in life we will dance with paradox. And we have to balance paradox, meaning it's good and bad. Everything's good or bad. You judge while you also are insecure. And to me, that's also how I've come to understand the Tao. The Tao is walking, it's a paradox. And that's what all the verses of the Tao are. They're just paradoxical ways. They're paradoxical poetry, really. It's just paradox put inside poetry. And it's interconnected. And that makes it interesting to me, because one of the things that you can do now with access to information is, what is it? In the 16th century, the printing press now made the Bible accessible to the poor or people who didn't have access to education. And was that one of the things that created the reforms? And now all of a sudden people all had access to certain things. Well, now I can sit in my living room and I can read the Tao. I can read the Quran. I can read the Bible. I can read the Torah, obviously, which is the first 5 books of the Bible. And then I can also read Confucianism. I can read Stoicism. I can dive into the philosophies. I have access to asking AI, which is generated through human data, questions, and I can receive an answer to that. So I can explore so much information, and not only from things that are credited, books that I just mentioned. You have access to everybody's thoughts on the internet. You get access to everybody's Twitters. You get access to, I've never had TikTok or the Snapchats. I don't know those as much. I've usually just been in the reign of Instagram and Twitter, but you can hear everybody else's opinions. So you're getting inundated with what people think they think, including what I'm doing right now, thinking what I think. And so we're all immersed into the sea of data, the sea of information. So what's the reform of that? And I think largely that's what's happening. I think that's what we're experiencing right now in the 21st century. Can you say that that's good? I don't know. Can you say that that's bad? I don't know. Maybe. I think the access to maybe is the fact of what was it in the 1600s or the 16th century, when Martin Luther wanted to change Christianity? What was happening around that era? What was happening around when Jesus was born? What was happening pre-Jesus? What was happening in the Roman Empire when the Republic was falling apart and Stoicism was birthed? What happened when we went from nomadic to agrarian culture and we were settling down? What happened when we went from small tribes to dynasties to civilization to empires to kings to democracies? All these sort of things. Change is change. Who knows if it's good or bad? It's just change. And so when I round out my thoughts on this, I have a group of my friends, good friends of mine, that we've been getting together. I missed the first one and I was late to the second one. So they've been getting together. I've been just joining in when I can. But we've been talking a lot about faith and history. We try to get together on Sunday nights and communicate on some of these things. But this is what we're preparing to talk about next week. So sorry, Petey. I hope you don't get bummed at me for talking about this. But I read this. He sent this to me last night. I read this, and it has a lot to do with what I'm understanding about my own self, my own ego, my own awareness as I complete the Bible here. Disappointed by the Scriptures is the title of this. So I formed the intention of reading the Holy Scriptures to see what kind of books they were. And this is what I found, but only later, something that was beyond the grasp of the proud, something not clear to the immature, something simple when one first encounters it, but sublime as one advances, something shrouded in deep mystery. At that time, I was not the sort of person to accept God's word, to bow my head and follow its lead. But in those days, I did not think of the Scriptures as I do now. To me, they seemed not fit to compare with the dignified style of Cicero. My bloated pride recoiled at their simplicity. My mind failed to grasp their depth. Scripture is such that it grows with little ones even as they grow. But I was too conceited to bear to be childlike. I was swollen with pride and saw myself as sophisticated. When he sent this to me, I highlighted the last 2 verses of that and sent it back to him. I was swollen with pride and saw myself as sophisticated. And the reason why I did that is it's hard. It's comical for my own self. My wife was making fun of me the other night in a funny way, but she was saying that my ego is what drove me to read the Bible at the end of 2023 to finishing it now. And I was mad at her, which most of the times when you are angry at something or you react in such a way, it's because it's true and it bothers you. And so you defend yourself. And I've found that to be common, not only in my own life, but many of the people that I work with and many of the environments I've been. I think it's just it's a natural thing that we do. So clearly when she first said it to me, I couldn't accept that as truth, so I denied her. And as the day went on and I thought about it and I slept on it and I woke up, it was just very accurate. Because egotistically, I didn't want to sit in rooms anymore having not read the entire Bible and talk about anything within the Bible. Now there's a inspirational side of that, or a gritty side of that, is definitely taken me a lot of time. I've had to be diligent. I've had to be focused. I can't quit in anything that I've done in sports or in business or in relationships. That's been the moral of the story. That's been the metaphor that we all share in any of our accomplishments and endeavors that we go down. So how can I not look at that in admiration of self towards the completion of such a task, because it has required so much time? It's like someone running a marathon, I would imagine. And why do you do that? If you're not getting paid to run a marathon, why do people do certain things? Why do people sit in silence for days on end? It's what we do. It's the spirit. It's the essence of who we are that calls to us, that makes us want to do things. It's like someone completing a massive puzzle or a large painting. Writing a book is a great example. All these sort of things. But the part was at the end, this that compared well with my wife's sentiment a couple of nights ago, was I was swollen with pride and saw myself as sophisticated. I think that egotistically, when I first started out on the adventure and I got called out by her days ago, which has maybe been the lesson of the last year and a half or however long that's been of reading and trying to complete it, is my pride wanted to know. I wanted to be educated and know things to largely seem sophisticated. And now as I'm bearing down and get ready to complete the 73 books, I feel like I know what I need to know, knowing that I don't know any of it. It's like I don't understand any of it. And I would have liked, when I originally started, I wanted to read all of it so that I could get on something like this and tell everybody. Not that I finished it, that I could tell everybody how to live or what was right or wrong with it and all these sort of things. And I think that in and of itself, the drive of the human ego, it forces us into wanting to be sophisticated so that we feel as if we have answers, because something about the ego materially makes us, it's a lie, right? Because anytime you study anything, you realize you don't know anything. There's a professor that talks about this in the quantum field, the quantum mechanics. He says that when you start studying quantum mechanics, and if you study it for a week later, you'll know less, even though you've studied it for the first time. And the moral of his story is that that's the point of why you study quantum mechanics, is to unlearn you thinking that you know. And so we should pursue knowledge, which is what makes sophistication so fascinating to ponder on, and also understanding the role of our ego to ponder on. Because if I didn't have an ego in the beginning, the ego was never strong enough until I was in my mid-30s to get me to sit down and read it. Purely ego was needed to do that, right? In the action and doing. Is there an ego to even trying to get to heaven? Is that egotistical? Because so much of the work of the commandments and the laws that were passed to Moses, that were passed early on, when obviously through the Exodus and those sort of things, the laws that were given to the people of Israel, the Israelites, and the commandments of the Christian Bible, it's done by doing. You can read it all day. You can go to church all night, all day, all night, whatever you want to say, whatever you want to consider. You can do that, but the action of doing is needed, which is so simple and complex that in order to sustain that actuality, you would need to pursue faith. You need to pursue a higher being. In that case, you need to pursue God, the Holy Spirit, which is in all of us. But the sin of human nature, we're not strong enough without God. And so even to ascend to heaven, would we need the ego to create action? Would I need to have such egotistical drive and belief in the doing of following the commandments that I'm able to ascend? And so it's weird. I laugh at it now when I was frustrated the other night when Chell said that to me. But it, in a way of its truth, in saying that at one point I wanted to be able to walk around egotistically knowing that I'd completed it. Without that ego, do I complete it? And through the completion of it, am I more of who I am, which I don't know because it becomes contemplative, which is what I'm understanding about faith and across all faiths, is that faith is a mystery. God is a mystery. And in that passage that I just read, there was the word childlike, which again I talk a lot about often, because in the childlikeness, the perception, the consideration of awe or wonder is magnified because of mystery. And I'll share this and then I'll close. When I was a little kid, I used to play football with two imaginary friends, Marky and Enel. I shared this last night on the study with my buddies. And I compared this to our walk in faith, because the topic was around how God is a mystery, and the mystery is what creates an awe, a sense of wonder. My comparison to that in an egotistical material sense was that when I was a kid, I used to play football with Enel and Marky, and bless their hearts, as I told the boys last night, they let me win every game. I stole that line from Wedding Crashers. It's a great part, but I put it into my own story. So when Marky and Enel let me win at all these football games as a kid, and I played in all of them, it was pure fantasy. It was pure awe. It was childlike imagination. It was creativity at its finest. Yet to me, as the kid, every one of those football games was real. And we played them all out. And those guys, those buddies of mine were real. And I used to talk to them really and have real conversations with them and have very competitive games. We had seasons, we had championships. I'd get muddied up in the backyard. I would tell my mom and dad about the game, who won, how did it go, how did I play, what did we have to do better. I did all of those things. And so in comparison of that, is the child closest to God becomes the question. And as the adult matures and creates sophistication and intellect through our pursuit of needing to know or acting as if we know, or just knowing in general, our pursuit of sophistication of the ego, is that part of the paradox of making it back to the child? Who knows? Enjoy the morning, the afternoon, or the evening. Take care. Cheers.